again, thank you for the introduction. My name is Martin Latal. I am from Palacký University, Olomouc, where I am in my third year of PhD studies in cultural anthropology. And my main focus currently is VR and the let's say embodied experience with this technology. However, VR is closely connected to games and game studies, so I'm like somewhere between cultural anthropology, game studies, and let's call it science and technology studies. And today I'm going to be talking specifically about Dragon Age Veilguard and the many, I call them narrative controversies surrounding the game, but it's more of a general discussion surrounding this title, which has garnered a lot of positive and negative feedback. And the main point I'm trying to talk about today is that these controversies and the problems and we can already talk about a commercial failure at this point of the game, stem more from shifts in gaming culture, the current socio-political climate, and some sort of nostalgia regarding the entire franchise, rather than just, outright lack of quality. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be basically confronting my own close reading or close play of the game and various social media discourse, for lack of a better term, surrounding Veilguard, from YouTube videos, reviews, professional reviews, social media, opinions on Reddit, etc., etc. And basically, I'm going to talk about the context of the Dragon Age series. Then I'm going to outline very quickly some of the problems the game perceivedly has, and then I'm going to focus on the underlying storytelling and, of course, on the issues of inclusivity and identity representation, because that is most often the most controversial topic. So hopefully it worked. Just for a quick context, Dragon Age Veilguard is the fourth installment in the Bioware fantasy RPG franchise, running from year 2009. And for our discussion today, the most important thing to consider is that Dragon Age and Bioware in general is praised for its narratives, its characters, its world buildings. So the let's say criticism on the technical issues with these games is often it takes a backstage, because again, people play these games not to have a experience that's perfectly seamless and technically or visually flawless, but it's to be narratively and emotionally engaged. And of course, we are going to be talking a lot about minority representation and, of course, the unfortunate idea surrounding culture wars in games industry, which has become the cornerstone of the criticism when it comes to Veilguard and even previous Dragon Age titles. But we are going to be talking about this specific installment here today. So, to outline a few of these controversies, basically, when you look at the social media presence and discourse surrounding the game, you will see, mainly talking about the narratives, things that are connected to sort of sanitization of the narrative. The people, the dialogues are supposedly like HR meetings, or you will see that the game has departed from its older tone of, in Dragon Age Origins, you engage with really heavy topics of racism, human sacrifice, mental and physical abuse, etc., etc. This has continued in Dragon Age 2. There was a bit of a departure in Dragon Age Inquisition, but you could still find these tones, and many people perceive that basically Veilguard has departed from this, and it's not the Dragon Age they grew up with, which technically I did grow up with, Dragon Age, so I can empathize with them. And there's also a talk about lack of depth, that the choices do not really matter, or that we have lost the choices that have been basically happening in the previous games, which again was staple of Dragon Age franchise. It had large focus on the player agency. Your choices carried over and over and over, and suddenly in Veilguard you get to choose basically three things that in the actual narrative of the game do not play that much of a role, which again has upset a lot of fans. And then again, we go back to the wokeness of the game and the inclusivity discussion, and uh, basically the meta narrative of games industry as culture wars, and should we represent, I don't know, queer minorities, should we represent ethnic minorities, should we talk about these dark topics that were present in the previous games. And there's going to be, of course, people that say, yeah, definitely we should, or we shouldn't, because these are my games and I want to immerse in a world that is clean of this political bullshit. But as we already mentioned today, games are political. So these are the problems that we could talk about, and we are going to slightly try to uncover what's going on in the background in the actual game. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about the underlying narrative and storytelling structure, because I feel like much of the criticism is basically consists of sort of not misunderstanding, but mismatched expectations. A lot of the discourse that was talking about the general feel of the game and the general big story of the game was, oh yeah, this feels like it's a Marvel movie. It's quippy, and it's formulaic and sanitized, simplified, etc., etc. But once you actually get into the game itself, which follows the quite common React structure, and you are faced with many choices, as was common with previous installments. But this time the choices feel different, and I actually suspect that the issue or the misreading could come from the fact that the choices here are not presented as moral choices. Basically, they are presented as yes, there is also very often they are going to be binary choices. You either save Treviso or you save Minrathus. You send Davrin to lead the team that goes to distract the main antagonist, or you choose Harding. There are choices that basically at the first sight do not convey a moral choice. They do not seem to, there is no outright correct answer. You have to make a choice. And this is what I feel is connected exactly to this underlying motive of Dragon Age Veilguard. Because at its core, during my playthrough, I noticed that this is not a story of, the typical hero story we know from Campbell, and we have seen it in Star Wars and all of these big franchises. It's also not a story of a nature of man versus nature, or man versus man, or as it could seem, because your main antagonists are these elven gods that are actually not gods, just powerful, very powerful people. Uh, but the underlying narrative is that it's a struggle of a man against himself. and you can see this in the structure of your main character, the Rook, who fights and struggles with the fact that he has been thrust into this world-ending situation and into the leadership role, which is not natural to him, and he has to deal with it through your intervention, basically. And all of your companions, again, are struggling basically with themselves. You have Emmerich, who I have in the picture, who basically his main point in the story is, or his main story, sorry, is to talk about his mortality and struggle with mortality and basically, yeah, facing the death's doors. Or, as I'm going to get to very cool in a few seconds, we have the issues of ethnic identity and gender identity when it comes to Tash and their personal quest, which very often has fallen flat in the discussion. That the narrative structure of the underlying narrative structure, what I'm trying to say is, it's a story about, you know, it's not a story of a big hero that comes along and tries to save the world. You do save the world in the end, but, and this is the main point of the second act of the game, to save the world, you have to first save yourself and then your friends, which is meant to be the main powerful narrative, basically, take away from the game. And yeah, some of the problems I'm going to be talking about right now just pile over this underlying narrative, and it gets lost, which is shame, because in my opinion, uh, it was conveyed very powerfully. It moved me, and I am not in the habit of being moved by media in general, but it worked this time. Uh, but another big topic when it comes to narrative and storytelling in Dragon Age is the question of inclusivity, identity, and storytelling. Basically, here I should somewhat divide the academic and personal level. If we look at the academic level, I believe that we can see that there is sort of a shift in the perception of inclusivity and identity in games and game studies. Because, for example, if you look at the discussion surrounding Dragon Age Veilguard, you will not see much of a discussion about player sexual characters, which in the past has been a big topic. I did my master's research on queer representation in video games, and it was visible that at one point player sexuality was very divisive idea. Currently, even if you look at Baldur's Gate, which was mentioned today, you see that, oh yeah, sure, we have this player sexuality or conditional bisexuality, and all in all, it's a representation, and some representation at the bottom line is better than no representation. But the main issue that has been voiced by mainly conservative voices is the issue of gender, with non-binary Tash and the possibility of playing as a fully transgender Rook, which just is a whole another can of worms that speaks more of the general climate in games and game audiences rather than about the game itself. There is a problem, or this is my perception of the problem, and that's basically at one point we can see that they have tried to create a compelling queer narrative with Tash, but they also tried to bundle it together with issues of their cultural identity, with the issue of their migrant identity, with the issue of their let's call it a genetic identity, because the main takeaway from their story is that Tash is not just a Kunari, but also a dragon-blooded Kunari. So that's something even further. And the fact that there are basically four, maybe even more, if we try to get even deeper into the character, conflicts to resolve. We just lose the fidelity. We cannot, or we, I just couldn't really relate to all of the problems, despite the fact that at some point I did sympathize with the character and I did understand the struggle, etc., etc. The fact that I was engaging with them through, one discussion is about gender, then we are back to culture, then we are back to dragon hunting, then we are again back at the gender identity. And I just feel like the narrative has fallen apart. And this is a problem with the entire section of the game that's connected to Tash, and the faction connected to them, which seems like just an afterthought in the greater narrative structure of the game, because the Lords of Fortune, which whom Tash is a member of, they just really don't matter in the greater narrative structure of the game. Oh yeah, you build up a reputation with them, you do a few quests, but when the big battles come along, you don't really get to see them in action, which is a shame. And it's a question, how did this happen? Well, I currently do not have the insight into the background things, which, yeah, it's an open-ended question. Something happened there, and this connects to basically what was already foreshadowed when we were talking about Disco Elysium. The big narrative issue with disjointment of this entire faction from the rest of the game manifests, in my opinion, in hate directed at Tash. The problem is not that Tash is non-binary or that they are hot-headed, etc., etc. The problem is that they don't matter that much in the world building narrative that is being presented and works in other areas. And I'm probably going really off the rails, which I was afraid that I'm going to do at this slide. So I'm going to just briefly mention the fact that, and this is something that I feel is a problem, and that is, the game was basically, yeah, it was being hammered for being Vogue and all the DIE propaganda, etc., etc. But I actually think it wasn't Vogue enough, because we didn't get to engage with these heavy topics. We didn't get to engage with the racism towards elves, which was established in previous installments. We didn't get to engage with stories like the story of Dorian from Inquisition, which is basically a struggle against homophobia and being faced with a magical conversion therapy. Or we didn't face a unlikable character like Ogren, who was just a drunk, misogynistic, dwarven, sorry for the word, bastard, but you had to work with him because he was helpful. Or looking outside Dragon Age franchise, we didn't get to engage with topics like Astarian's story of abuse and coping with trauma, which are incredibly important, and video games are a medium that allows to engage through immersive techniques, basically, with these topics in ways that are just so hard to replicate. And despite this, despite the possibility and despite the fact that there is a background and space to do that, it just fell flat in many ways, which is a criticism that comes both from the audiences and even from my feeling. I liked the game. I liked the game a lot, but I just see what could have been, and yeah, it's difficult to talk about this without becoming overly fiery in my talk, because, as I said, much of Bioware creations are about representation, and representation matters. Uh, Getting to conclusion and to summarization, we can say that the game was commercially unsuccessful. Today, the game is, I think, 50% at sale, or 40% at sale at Steam, which for a game that got published 2 months ago, that shows that there has been a problem. But also, I think that it's important to reiterate the fact that the public outrage that followed the game and probably has heavily influenced this unsuccessful release uh, should be confronted is to be confronted with a lived experience, because I did go into the game with all of this discourse already in me. I read all the, oh my God, Tash is rude and they are hypercritical, and it's sanitized, and etc., etc. And some of the criticisms are fair, but also there is substance underneath it. It's hidden by the flaws, and that's the main point I'm trying to get to in regard to wider game studies scholarship, and that's the question of how do we grasp this internal problem of quality? How do we grasp the fact that we have a game that is made by a lot of people that are responsible for a lot of things? We have the technical, we have the graphics, we have the narratives, and the narratives are written by teams of people that are responsible for their things, and it creates a final product. But if one of the places fails, as we mentioned, the issues in design and narrative very often just get swept over by, oh yeah, the game is woke, I'm not going to play because it's woke. But as was suggested, and I didn't realize it until I heard it today out loud, yeah, a lot of games are bad and woke, not because they are actually woke, but because they have an underlying problem that stems from the production process. And the final thought, I have been really ranting at this point, is something that is already slightly happening, and it has already happened with Dragon Age 2 for and that is Dragon Age 2. When it came out, it has been also very poorly received. There were problems with narratives and environments. People weren't happy. But currently, people just go on calling, basically, yeah, the fact that Dragon Age 2 aged like fine wine. At this point, the characters are still there. The deep stories are still there. And I would like to believe, and that's what I'm going to leave you with, that we are going to follow a similar trajectory here. That in a few years, we are going to be all very sad that there will not be a Dragon Age 5 because Dragon Age 4 failed, because the substance, as I said, despite its many flaws and obvious flaws, is there. It is still a Dragon Age, and it is still a Bioware engaging storytelling. Thank you for your attention.